is a token of enlightenment in many cultures. Blossoming from fluid chaos, it signifies revival, restoration, new birth. It makes a good opener for this story about my return to Vietnam. That's me in 1970 taking a lunch break, aboard a wooden junk like the one shown here. I was serving as a military advisor to a South Vietnamese coastal patrol group located on the northern shore of the Ham Luang River, one of the 5 major rivers in the Mekong Delta. I lived with about 200 South Vietnamese sailors and their families, and 3 other American advisors, roughly where the White Star is on this map, in what was then called Kinh Hoa province, but is now called Bến Tre. At our back door was a tiny fishing village called Tim Tom, which means shop of shrimp. Ever since diplomatic relations with Vietnam were restarted under President Clinton, my wife Alice and I wanted to revisit the place that was so important in my life, a place of spiritual awakening, revival, restoration, yes, all this in the midst of war. From other vets who had returned, I heard that Vietnamese people are remarkably friendly toward Americans, and just as curious about us as we are about them, 40-plus years after the war that they call the American War. When a Northwestern University alumni group announced an upcoming cruise down the Mekong River that would take us through parts of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, aboard this modern but antique-looking shallow draft steamer, the Pan Dao Mekong, which could easily tie up to any stump on the riverbank and put us ashore for walking tours, and shelter us in comfort in the hottest part of the day high up, where the view was superb and the breeze refreshing, why, we were among the first alums to sign aboard. Alice had her own photographic ambition. She is an urban farmer and wanted to show her Wilmington colleagues how the Vietnamese in the Delta grow vegetables, like these just outside Hanoi. Alice wasn't adverse to photographing ornamentals, some so exotic that we still haven't identified them. I went with 2 old film Leicas, but no long telephoto lenses, so in this show I'm especially grateful for several close-ups made by Barbara Robert, a fellow traveler, and Nguyen Hung, our guide in Hanoi. Thanks also to cellist Billy Street and pianist Dee Fell for providing the background music for this show. I was so glad that I would get to see what the Mekong Delta looks like in peacetime. Some images from my return trip recalled memories from 1970, like this one. A crazy warrant officer flying a small helo took me at 90 miles an hour and 10 feet above the rice paddies as he rushed the peasants sitting on the haunches of a water buffalo. Most of the images from my trip, though, evoked peace. And some taught me things about the Mekong that I didn't know before. For instance, that in Cambodia the Mekong runs almost clear. Due to my experience in the eastern portion of the delta, I had thought that the Mekong was muddy everywhere, but it actually flows from the Himalayas as crystal clear snowmelt and gets silty only gradually. When we flew in from the States, our first stop was Hanoi. Here, we're looking at the tomb of Ho Chi Minh, whom the Vietnamese affectionately call Uncle Ho. How strange it was to be in a former enemy's capital, a place we had bombed, and where our pilots were once imprisoned in the Hanoi Hilton, not far from this spot. It is said that Vietnam has 2 seasons, the hot and the very hot, or the dry and wet seasons. We were visiting in the cooler and drier one. It seemed the whole city was on motorbikes. bundled up, going to work or market or school. The day after we arrived, we went by van to mystical Halong Bay, a couple hours north of Hanoi. The air was cool, the water clear though not transparent, and our sampan rower skilled and strong. Halong Bay is hauntingly beautiful any time of year, but especially in the sunnier season. This is our guide's photo of Halong Bay in the summertime. The humpbacked islets in the bay, called karsks, are the leftovers from the erosion of a huge limestone layer. Many are hollow inside, leaving the largest caves that I have ever seen. During the bombing of Hanoi, people who could get to them took refuge in such caverns. The most memorable image of our trip was this bridge made from thousands of stout bamboo poles. It spans the shallows of the Mekong River near Kampong Cham, Cambodia, and carries motorbikes and light trucks from the mainland to 17 fishing villages offshore. The bridge is reconstructed every year. When the turbulent annual floods come, the people take it down pole by pole and store it for the next dry season. In the meanwhile, they make do with ferry transport. The bamboo bridge signifies for me the ingenuity, the patience, and persistence of the people of the Mekong Delta. These qualities of character are manifest in a number of industries we visited, like silk making. Here you see silkworms feeding and reproducing. Silk strands from the cocoons of some will be extruded by hand and twisted into very strong threads with which silk fabric is then woven. Natural dyes are made by boiling roots and leaves. The end product may look like this: a bright saffron homespun scarf, or more intricate and finer fabrics. We also visited a rubber plantation yielding a product similar to latex. Many developing countries buy Vietnam's rubber exports, which are cheaper than petroleum-based ones. We visited a local slow-fire kiln that makes colorful bricks like these. They are made hollow to save clay and provide better insulation. It takes 3 months of firing to turn out just one batch. Vietnam's Mekong Delta, with rich effluvial silt renewed by each year's flooding, is Southeast Asia's rice basket. Much of the planting is still done by hand, setting new plants while bending over at the waist, knee-deep in flooded paddies. But new methods are being tried. We saw one huge rice field planted by broadcasting rice kernels, and we saw small tractors being used to cultivate instead of water buffalo. Along with rice farming, fishing is a chief industry of the Delta. It's done in all sorts of ways: by hand-lined, by nets tended topside, and by diving from a sampan, running an air compressor, and staying down 20 minutes or so to tend nets underwater while one takes a gulp of air from a hose tied to one's waist. Many fisher people from the Delta live in floating villages. Notice that the house duck has his own little floating hooch as well. Naturally, fisher folk get around entirely by boat. During the Vietnam War, Americans heard a lot about peasants in black pajamas. Some people still dress in what we would call pajamas, but wow, are they colorful. Alice was keen to discover how people were growing vegetables. She hadn't considered this approach: farming waterborne herbs. I was keen to explore the spirituality of the region. We saw so many ruins of ancient temples on our travels. This one is in Laos. And this one, called the Jungle Temple, because authorities have allowed the jungle to overgrow it, is located in Cambodia. Not far away stands this splendid temple, which took several lifetimes to build, but then was abandoned on the very day it was to be opened because lightning struck. This was taken as a bad omen. We were eager to visit the largest and most famous temple in the world, indeed a complex of temples located in the jungles of Cambodia called Angkor Wat. Alas, so were thousands of other tourists, including these 3 Buddhist monks on holiday. There was an odd mixture of tourism and sincere worship in these ancient holy places. Beneath the madding crowd in this somber chamber of Angkor Wat sat a holy woman, praying and offering prayers for others. In Vietnam, Alice and I visited a one-stop house of prayer where worshippers were lifting sticks of incense and practicing several ancient religious traditions. Buddhist, Taoist, animist, Hindu, Confucian, ancestor reverence, and probably a few more I fail to identify. In a town called Luang Prabang in Laos, we found a very active Buddhist community with more than 35 thriving monasteries. Each morning, tourists join locals to give mendicant monks their daily rice. In this practice, the givers kneel, the beggars stand. Cambodian boys often leave their families and attend Buddhist monasteries to learn to read and write. Some decide to stay and take monastic vows, but there's no pressure to do so. Another view of Southeast Asian spirituality. Outside a large pagoda in Vietnam, a woman was burning pieces of paper and cardboard in a large ornate metal box. "What is she doing?" I asked our guide. "She is burning offerings of fake money and models of cell phones and televisions and fancy cars, which people pay for with real money inside the pagoda," he replied. "They believe that their ancestors' spirits are accessible and that they will be pleased by these gifts and bless their loving offspring with prosperity." We witnessed the underside of the human spirit in the killing fields of Cambodia. Many people associate the killing fields with the capital, Phnom Penh, but hundreds of such mass graves have been discovered throughout the country. It is a kind of miracle that Cambodia, in not much more than a generation, has largely recovered from this monstrous genocide. Phnom Penh, once almost totally empty because of the deportation of its citizens by the Khmer Rouge, is now thriving. Vietnam has largely recovered too, although we found at the War Remnants Museum in Ho Chi Minh City that the genetic effects of the defoliant Agent Orange continued to maim the offspring of Vietnamese parents who lived in contaminated areas, just as they affect the offspring of American GIs who were exposed also to the poison. Despite the damage caused by the American War, Vietnamese people are surprisingly friendly toward the U.S. today. This painting by a young Vietnamese child shows a boy with a USA t-shirt holding hands with multi-ethnic children, 2 of whom appear Asian. The painting was hung just beside the exhibit concerning the Agent Orange children. Our guide in Hanoi explained to me, more than 1/2 of Vietnamese people were born after the American War. They have no personal memory of it. They are looking forward. They are moving forward. It has been my pleasure to meet a young Vietnamese photographer online, Phan Tuan Khan, who exemplifies the hope of post-war Vietnam. I hope that you will experience a love for the Vietnamese people through his images. I began to experience this love even as I lived and fought among them over 40 years ago. I hope you'll take time to read about my own spiritual journey in my recently published photo-illustrated ebook, Double Exposure, A Veteran Returns to Vietnam. And I hope that you will recommend it to other veterans, because the challenge of spiritual recovery from war is similar for us all.